Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Our team preview series rolls on today. We are previewing all 16 SEC teams in podcast form, I should say. Today we're going to talk about the Kentucky Wildcats, a program that I don't think there's any program in college baseball that's done more to change the way they are thought about and talked about and perceived over the last couple of years than Kentucky. And yet we have them unranked, Mark. And I think that's, I mean, look, we can look inward, and it should be said, first of all, Mark and I are just two voices in the room on the top 25. Although Mark and I both, I don't want to speak necessarily totally for you, Mark, but it's not like Mark and I were in there pounding the table for Kentucky. We have questions about Kentucky. But I think it's important because this was given the success the last 2 years, there were some eyebrows raised that we didn't have Kentucky ranked, Mark. And so I guess the opening question, I'll answer too, but I'll have you go, which is just, are we not giving Kentucky enough of the benefit of the doubt that yes, they've got some roster turnover, but they've kind of proven themselves over the last couple of years to be a program heading the right direction, a program on the rise. So what say you about the thought that we're not giving them enough benefit of the doubt?
Well, I think it starts with, it was an incredible season last year, and the year before was really good, kind of breakthrough year where Kentucky hosted a regional, then making it to Omaha for the first year. I mean, this is a program that's got some momentum. Okay, so now the question becomes, all right, you've had the success. You lost 7 of your position starters. You lost probably your top 7, 8 pitchers as well. Those are enormous gaps that have to be filled. And when you look at what Kentucky filled them with, there are a lot of players that we don't know a ton about. And just being honestly, they're not from elite programs that we watched a whole lot. They're more elevating, right? It doesn't mean they aren't going to be really good players. We just don't know a lot about them. And there is a transition as you move up. And I think that's where the uncertainty falls with Kentucky. On one hand, you think, well, they did a really good job in the transfer portal with getting the program to elevate, but getting it, doing that year after year and hitting on all of these different guys, because you don't just need 3 or 4 of them to hit, because you've got all this churn. You need a bunch of these guys to hit. And that's where it's just a leap of faith that I'm not there on with Kentucky at this point. Now, maybe they'll prove us wrong and we'll find out. I think they're going to be a competitive team. I think they're going to be in the hunt. I will actually be surprised if they're not, in that regional mix towards the end of the year. The question is, though, with especially on the mound, you have all these innings to fill, all of these pitchers that need to come through and do things that they've never done at this level, at the top of the sport, where you're playing all these great teams year after year. I mean, week after week. Look at that road schedule. I mean, that's just brutal, and we can get into that too. But that's what's going to make it really challenging to go into these pressure-packed environments, and you haven't done it before. That to me is what Kentucky has to overcome, and basically you got to prove it, right? Because that's where we are.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that there. I think we are giving them some benefit of the doubt in that now Kendall is doing our big SEC preview, like the single story, like for the site. So I don't want to speak totally for him, but it's been a collaborative process between the three of us to kind of come up with the pecking order. But gone are the days when, back, it was a 14-team league back in these days, but gone are the days when it's like, all right, Missouri 14 and then like probably Kentucky 13, and then you go from there. Like those days are gone. Like that's, I mean, I personally have them ahead of a number of teams. I too think they'll be in the regional mix. So I think it's just a process. Like it's one step at a time in terms of getting benefit of the doubt. So I do think there's a benefit of the doubt of like, I don't think this team is going to bottom out in a way that previous Kentucky teams that popped, you kind of assume that there's going to be a little bit of a bottoming out process. I don't think that's in the cards. I don't think that's happening. right? So I do think there's that. And I think it's, if you're a Kentucky fan, I think it's totally fair to look at, hey, Georgia, they got to a super regional last year, but hadn't been on that stage in a long time. And then now they're a top 10 team. And I think that's on its face fair, but I do think there are subtle differences there where, they've got in the rotation proven pieces like a Leighton Finley and a Colton Smith that are big time prospects. You've got, the position player group, you're bringing in players, accomplished players from major programs like Devin Obie from Duke, right? For that matter, Nolan McCarthy plays there now.
Right. You beat me to it.
Right. So,
yeah.
Daniel Jackson is their backup catcher at Georgia, and that's a guy who played on a regional team at Wofford last year. So I do think there are some differences there. That being said, Kentucky has shown an ability to find the right pieces in the transfer portal. And it actually makes me, strangely, I feel like it almost gives me more confidence in some of the transfers that Kentucky's brought in, that you look at some of these guys and the numbers really, the numbers aren't necessarily eye popping. I mean, some are pretty good, but to me, that tells me that there's been an evaluation beyond just being like, hey, this kid put up good numbers at this school, let's bring him in. That there's actually been a second level evaluation of, right, how does he fit in with our team, skills wise, temperament wise, versatility wise, all that kind of stuff. So I do think that they probably just are good at that part of it. Are they getting the types of players Georgia's getting? No. And then Georgia has some carryover guys that I like more so than what I like that Kentucky has on paper, especially on the mound. So, but now let's kind of springboard forward, Mark. And I think what I really do like about this group is that it does seem like a good mix of, we're starting to develop some younger guys through the program. Obviously, Tyler Bell is the big name there. Turned down real money, 66th overall pick to the Rays, decides to go to Kentucky. That's a big deal. That's something Kentucky was not doing before. Right. That is, I think, a direct result of the success we've seen on the field the last couple of years. That a player of that caliber can say, hey, I'm going to go play at Kentucky because I want a chance to play in the College World Series. That's just something that wasn't really on the table for them before. But beyond him, Eli Small's a sophomore that's, a developmental guy through the program. Ethan Hindle is a sophomore who's coming through the program. Caius Gargett, a sophomore that should be, up for some more playing time this time around. So it's a combination of those guys, a combination of older guys who've been in the programs, Devin Burks, frankly, like a guy who I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, like a guy who I think probably was thinking he'd go to pro ball, and was probably disappointed not to get drafted, but he's back. And so now a catching room of him and Rafael Pelletier from Kansas State is a pretty good catching room. So you've got the developmental guys, you've got the older guys who've been in the program, and then you have transfers that kind of fit the mold of the transfers who have worked at Kentucky. It tends to be a more veteran guy. It tends to be, there's a premium on athleticism. There's a premium on guys who can maybe play some different positions. So the roster makeup itself looks a lot like what we've seen succeed at Kentucky the last couple of years. And so I think that's good news, right? Just right off the bat before we even get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. And I think that's the question, is the players that have come in, are they ready? Are they going to buy in? Are they going to follow what, the expectations that Kentucky has set? Are they going to play this the right way to fit that style of play? I mean, Kentucky was has been a high energy, in your face, aggressive offense, and it has worked beautifully. And sometimes, having that carryover when your roster didn't carry over, it's hard to replicate. So we'll see. That's the part that I'm really interested in. And, you mentioned the comparison to Georgia. That's where two of their assistants have gone the last 2 years with Coggin and Emirati. I think that's an interesting thing, as you have new blood coming in. What kind of ideas come out of that? Different concepts perhaps to be introduced. Not that the other wasn't successful, but you want to take what you've got and add, add some things to improve it based on this new personnel. And that, I think for me, does their middle of the lineup was really good last year. What does it look like now? Because if I had to guess right now, I don't know who their 3, 4, 5 hitters are. Right? Can probably maybe hazard a guess, but I do think that's part of the uncertainty why people like us have trouble with this, because there is just so many new players and players who haven't who haven't done it at this level. I do think that there's enough of a track record with this staff that you feel like that they're going to figure it out, but it's just, like I said before, it's a leap of faith, man. And you've got a Tyler Bell who, is he ready to hit SEC pitching? You feel pretty good about him defensively. Most of the time, it's a learning curve for freshmen to come in offensively. The Justin LeBrons and Gavin Grahovics, those are the exceptions typically, versus guys who just come in and light it up. So what will he look like? And then the transfers. I mean, the Cole Hay, Will Marcy, Sean Montoya, Carson Hansen, Trey Lawrence, the people who have been successful where they, at their last stops, what does it look like now as they make the transition? Or does it, is this a kind of team that maybe they stumble out of the blocks a little bit as they figure out what it needs to look like, because they go on the road the first 2 weekends. They go to Nashville twice. They go to Belmont and Lipscomb. What does that look like? But then by conference play, are they a whole different kind of club as they learn what's going on? Or is there even another learning curve once you get to conference play and the velocity's up, and it's just a whole different look as well. That's what makes Kentucky, for me, is certainly one of the most challenging teams to evaluate heading into the season, just because you had so much success last year, and those players for the most part are not there anymore.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of agree that Kentucky being as good as they were the last 2 years, particularly last year, was such a good story. I mean, not only just because it's it's Kentucky, which just doesn't have that much history. It's also that the way in which they did it.
Yeah, they were fun.
They were fun, and it made, I also found that it just made people really frustrated. And I think part of it is that, some of the stuff that Kentucky did on the field, people chalked up to being, little league or whatever. Like, I don't buy into that, but it's also just that I think that some of that frustration, I think, was misplaced. And I think it comes from a place of like, how are they doing this? Because they just built their roster so much differently than really any other SEC Omaha team we've really ever seen. It wasn't Florida with a parade of guys throwing 97. It wasn't Tennessee hitting 100,000 home runs in a season. It wasn't LSU with the best pitcher hitter combination we've seen in a long time in college baseball. Right. And so I think there's just like this kind of feeling of not understanding how it was happening. And that made people frustrated, which is part of what made it a good story, honestly, the last couple of years. So them being good again this year, and I think is a good story again, because here it is. We're kind of like just not expecting as much, maybe looking at a step back, and for them to prove us wrong, I think would be a really good story if they are. And by the way, like for the 3 and 4 hitters, like Cole Hagee, Dylan Kuntz from Campbell would kind of be my guess, 3, 4 in some order. Like Kuntz is a big, strong guy with pop. And so it's, he kind of maybe like a Ryan Nicholson type, not in terms of defensive, although he is a good defender. It's my understanding, but like Ryan Nicholson put up decent numbers in Cincinnati and just was otherworldly last year at Kentucky. Like, could Dylan Kuntz have a similar deal? We'll see. But I do sneakily like some of the pitchers here. Even though it is a real who's who of programs that are just fairly anonymous. But I will say, doing digging on Ethan Walker from Longwood, like his peripheral numbers are really good. It's a really high strikeout rate. He held batters to an under 200 average last year at Longwood. the ERA is 4.50, but I don't think that tells the whole story. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. I was not watching a lot of Longwood baseball. I got to be honest. So I can't really tell you, but the stuff is good. The peripheral numbers are good. I think he's sneaky good. Scott Rouse, kind of the same thing. The numbers aren't as good, but another relatively high strikeout guy. And then for me, the wild card is Nick McKay from South Dakota State, a 7th-year senior. Super injured. Like you feel for the guy from that standpoint of just every time he'd get rolling, it's another injury. I think he's missed 3 full seasons in his career. And yeah, I know he's missed 3 full seasons in his career. This is his 4th healthy year on paper. That is 7th year. But I remember when he was coming into South Dakota State at the time, this is my previous job. And one of my conferences I previewed was the Summit League. And he was, for a couple of years, like the consensus best pitching prospect in the Summit League. And okay, it's the Summit League, but the stuff was real. And he had a really good freshman year. Then he got hurt for 2 straight years. And he bounced back and had a nice year last year. But I have to wonder, if he gets to Kentucky and he's just got such a solid baseline, like he's a pretty high floor guy. But I do have to wonder if he gets to Kentucky and, just starts working with some different voices. Dan Roselle, obviously a very good pitching coach, starts working with some of their technology, some of their player development guys. I do wonder if there's another gear there for Nick McKay, because I like the makeup. I like the stuff. He's I wonder if he's talked to Darren Williams about what it's like to be almost in your mid-20s playing in the SEC. Yeah. Shout out to Dub if you're listening. So I'm intrigued by him. And then one other name I'll throw is Chase Alderman, who from Eastern Kentucky, who was hurt in the fall. Well, I don't want to say hurt. He was not on the mound in the fall, but he has been pitching in scrimmages. Shout out to Derek Terry, who does a fabulous Kentucky baseball newsletter called Batcat Central. He did a scrimmage. He does scrimmage write-ups during this time of year, and he talked about Chase Alderman the other day and came away really, really impressed. He could be Kentucky's closer, it looks like. So that's another name to kind of file away. So look, there's not a lot of star power on the mound, but there wasn't last year really. And we saw how that turned out. So I'm intrigued. Consider me intrigued when it comes to the transfers on the Kentucky pitching staff.
Yeah. I mean, you covered most of the top ones. I guess one guy that really caught my eye in flashes last year is Robert Hogan. Came in, and I mean, that's some serious filthy bullpen action there.
He can spin it. The guy can spin it.
Yeah. I would anticipate a bigger role for him. That's a guy could really be a difference maker. I do think that just all of those older pitchers who've thrown a lot of innings and have had success stepping into this league, that's going to be the key, right? Do you get flustered? Do you handle the moment? You hope that all of that translates to SEC, success. It has in the past. I mean, you look at what Trey Pooser did last year. He came out of nowhere, if I'm being honest, and was a Friday night guy in the SEC and one of the best pitchers. Gets some maybe some unexpected performances from some of these guys that we haven't talked about to elevate to the depth. I think that's going to be the key for them being able to have the success, because just about everybody's going to have 5, 6 pitchers that you use. But what happens when you have to go to 7, 8, and 9 in this league where everybody can really swing it? Are you able to and keep yourself in the game? That is, we talked about some of the concerns, just the uncertainty, but just the pitching depth in general. That would be the other question I would have on the Wildcats.
Yeah, and I think it's an underrated piece of last year that Pooser and Mason Moore combined for 182 innings and change between the two of them. And there's just a lot of value in that. just the fact that, hey, you just knew when those two guys were starting, you probably weren't going to need a ton of bullpen. And it allowed Kentucky, because let's face it, there were times last year in the bullpen for Kentucky as good as, on balance, Johnny Hummel was, Robert Hogan was, Hagenow had his moments. There were stretches, though, where it felt real tenuous in the bullpen for Kentucky last year. And so the fact that they had those two guys they could pretty reliably trust for at least 5 and then maybe 6 or 7, it did take some pressure off. And so is any of this group going to be prepared to do that? Is there going to be one 90 inning guy, much less 2 on this pitching staff? And we'll obviously find out.
Right. And Dominic Nyman gave him, he was pretty much you pencil him in to start every week too, and gave you some good innings. So I do think that's if you're looking for Kentucky, the key to success this year is having some inning eaters. They can, save the bullpen and be strategic with it. Right. So you can use your bullets, at the opportune moment, to try to win a series.
The last thing before we wrap here, Mark, is we're kind of remiss that we haven't brought it up yet, but one of the big questions is this has been an elite defensive team for 2 years. I mean, last year they fielded 980, and one of the beauties of being able to run out a starting rotation of, Pusser and Nyman and Mason Moore is that, I mean, anything on the ground was an out. You had Grant Smith at short, you had Emilian Pitre at second, you had Mitchell Daly at third. You basically had 3 shortstops on the infield, and then Ryan Nicholson, who was outstanding over there. In the unlikely event of a bad throw from one of those 3, he was saving a lot of errors. And so I don't think they'll be that good, just because there's only one way to go really from how good they've been defensively the last 2 years. But obviously it's a program that values that. So I don't think it's going to crater in that regard, but I do wonder if a pitching staff that, it's a lot of new pitchers, but I do wonder if just kind of that security blanket of, hey, let's get a ground ball and we can get out of this, isn't maybe as much of a sure thing. And does that put a little bit extra pressure on a pitching staff to maybe try to miss some more bats? And maybe they can, maybe they can't. But that was such a security blanket for the team the last 2 years. Is pretty much every routine play was going to get made. And that's not something in college baseball you can really take for granted.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess the cool thing is, you have a guy like Tyler Bell who could step in. If anyone can step in for what Grant Smith did, maybe it's him, an elite level defensive player. But then what happens in the rest of the infield, as new players step in and find their niche. So the one guy that we didn't mention is James McCoy, and it's just teased us with so much potential. You look at him and you watch him take BP, or you just see him move, and you think, oh man, this looks like an elite player, but the production just hasn't been there. Is this finally the year? Right? Is because he's running out of clock here. Can he finally step through and be that guy? Because we're all enamored with his talent. Is this finally his season to break through and get it done? And that's another fun storyline that we'll continue to follow here on D1 all season long.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like, maybe he's a 4th outfielder, and if so, he's a very talented one, and maybe just like a little bit, not being a guy who's in there every single day might be good. In his case, to have a more defined role than that. We shall see, but it's a good point. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. A couple of notes. One is that if you're a Kentucky fan and just jumped on board with this episode, we invite you to go back and listen to all of the previous preview podcasts we've done so far this spring, or the lead up to the spring. Let's be honest, still winter outside. And then also stick around, if you're interested in hearing about the rest of the SEC, hearing about some of your foes coming in the 2025 season, we would invite you to do that. And then, of course, leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up, or whatever it is on Spotify, wherever you listen. Just give us some love there. Really helps us grow the show and find other SEC baseball fans out there. You can also get a subscription to SEC Extra using the Preview 25 code to get 25% off. no better time to do so. Not only does that unlock all of mine and Mark's preview content leading up to the season, but also all of that put together by the ACC extra team. So, maybe if you live in a little house divided, it's a, like a Kentucky Louisville house.
There you go.
You get you get a subscription, you get SEC extra, ACC extra, both sides of that divided house are satisfied there. So use promo code preview25 to get 25% off that subscription package where you will get both SEC and ACC extra. All right. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.